Most money advice assumes that if you understand the logic, your behavior will follow. But if that were true, personal finance wouldn't be personal. People with the same information don't behave the same way. Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money starts from that mismatch. His claim is that no one's crazy with money. Each lesson stands on its own, but they also stack. Because Housel's argument isn't about getting rich, it's about understanding why people behave the way they do around money, and why the same behavioral patterns repeat across life. Everyone is responding to their own experience.
Super quick interruption. So I'm currently in Thailand working on a video for my second channel, which basically takes everything that I have compiled into this channel, all the thoughts, and puts it into the real world and see how it really stacks up. Point being, I'm about to take my Ultra Focus Energy Pack to get that mental clarity to lock in on this project that I just collaborated with a 5-star Indian cuisine restaurant. If you value this information, you're gonna value the second channel just as much, especially if you're an entrepreneur, especially if you're trying to figure out your path. There's a lot of good things going on in this video. I'm really excited about all the projects that I've got going on, and I can't wait to get back home, start producing more videos for Beck Archive. Fuck, man. Good things to come, good things to come. Me and my 40 subscribers.
People don't make financial decisions based on objective reality. They make them based on their version of reality, shaped by a personal experience. This is where Housel starts, because without this point, every other lesson in the book gets misread. Most financial thinking assumes a shared baseline, that if two people see the same data, they should reach the same conclusion. And if they don't, one must be uninformed, irrational, or reckless. But that assumption breaks immediately in the real world. People look at identical situations and reach opposite conclusions, not because one is wrong, but because they're responding to different lived histories. When advice fails, it's usually not because the advice is incorrect, it's because it conflicts with someone's internal sense of safety, risk, or identity. Housel's claim is simple and precise, that no one is crazy with money. Every decision makes sense to the person making it, once you account for their experiences. Your personal history with money acts like a filter. It determines what feels risky, safe, and obvious, and that filter is largely invisible to you. You don't experience your beliefs as beliefs, you experience them as common sense. Housel points out that people who grew up in different economic periods develop fundamentally different instincts. Someone who lives through the Great Depression learns that markets can collapse permanently, while someone who grew up during a long bull market learned that downturns are temporary and survivable. Neither lesson is wrong, but Housel extends this idea beyond markets. People who have experienced scarcity often prioritize security over growth, in the same way that people who have experienced abundance often tolerate risk more easily. Even the year you were born matters. Your first encounters with money often becomes reference points that shape your behavior for decades. This reveals a deeper pattern, that humans confuse experience with truth. Your personal history represents a microscopic slice of reality, but it feels comprehensive because it's the only slice you've lived. As Housel puts it, your experiences might represent a fraction of how the world works, but they account for most of how you think the world works. This is why financial arguments rarely resolve anything. People aren't debating facts, they're defending lived realities. A common mistake is to interpret this lesson as relativism, that all financial behavior is equally good or justified. That's not Housel's point. He's saying that judgment without context is meaningless. Understanding why someone behaves the way they do isn't the same as endorsing that behavior. But without understanding, you can't learn from it or from your own mistakes. When you copy a decision without sharing the same emotional wiring or tolerance for uncertainty, the strategy breaks under pressure. It also explains why people abandon good ideas. They weren't built for the person's psychological reality. Plans fail when they're unlivable. Behind every success is an element of luck. In every failure, there's an element of risk. Ignoring either leads to distorted conclusions. People want outcomes to be fair, and they want success to mean deserved, and failure to mean earned. That belief gives the world a sense of order and control, but it breaks the moment you examine real lives. People with equal intelligence, effort, and discipline often end up in radically different places, and people with reckless behavior sometimes win anyways. Rather than accept this, we retrofit explanations. We call winners smart and losers careless. Housel separates skill from outcome. Skill increases the odds of success, but it doesn't determine the results. He considers luck and risk as operating outside intention. They're present in every decision, but only visible in hindsight. And hindsight creates the dangerous illusion that what happened was inevitable. Humans systematically underestimate randomness. We prefer stories where cause and effect are clean, linear, and moral. But if luck matters, then success doesn't guarantee wisdom, failure doesn't prove stupidity, and imitation becomes dangerous. So we minimize luck and exaggerate skill, especially our own. Housel captures this in a sharp observation that success convinces people they're better than they actually are. Some people take this lesson and slide into fatalism. If luck matters, why try? But what Housel is saying is that luck affects outcomes and skills affect probabilities. The lesson is not nothing matters, its certainty is an illusion. You can do everything right and still lose. In the same way, you can do many things wrong and still win. This lesson explains why copying success stories often fail so much. Because people copy outcomes without accounting for the invisible variables that made them possible. It also explains why extreme confidence often precedes collapse. If you believe success proves superiority, you stop guarding against downside. Risk doesn't disappear, it accumulates. The most dangerous moment in any financial journey is the moment you believe failure is no longer possible. Compounding is not powerful because of high returns, it's powerful because of time. And time only works for people who don't get knocked out early. Most people understand that returns build on returns, and that small gains can become large over long periods. What they underestimate is the psychological cost of staying invested long enough for that math to matter. Compounding looks unimpressive for years, sometimes for decades. During that time, volatility dominates the experience, so people abandon the process before the results ever appear. They confuse nothing's happening yet with this doesn't work. Housel reframes compounding away from optimization and towards endurance. The question isn't what's the best strategy, it's what strategy lets you stay invested for the longest time without breaking. Because compounding doesn't require brilliance, it requires survival. If you're wiped out financially or emotionally, your compounding stops. Housel uses Warren Buffett to expose a common misunderstanding. Buffett's advantage wasn't extraordinary annual returns, it was extraordinary duration. The majority of his wealth was late in life because of the decades of compounding that finally stacked high enough to become visible. Housel then runs the counterfactual. If Buffett had started later or stopped earlier, the result wouldn't just be smaller, it would be categorically different. In this sense, time was a variable between radically different outcomes. Humans expect progress to feel proportional to effort, but compounding violates that intuition. Early returns feel insignificant, middle years feel frustrating, and late returns feel unbelievable. That pattern creates impatient people, so they'll interrupt it before the system has had time to produce any outcome. An easy misinterpretation is that compounding is about finding the highest return asset. But to Housel, high returns are meaningless if they come with volatility you can't tolerate. What he's saying is a modest strategy that you stick with will always beat an aggressive one you abandon. Compounding rewards consistency, not necessarily cleverness. This lesson explains why most people underperform the very markets they invest in. They exit during stress, abandon plans during drawdowns, confuse volatility with failure. But it's a matter of your behavior that causes you to witness compounding. There's no natural stopping point in money. Without a defined sense of enough, progress turns into risk. Most people assume financial problems come from having too little, but many of history's worst financial failures came from people who already had more than they needed. As people accumulate wealth, their reference points change. What once felt sufficient begins to feel inadequate because comparison changed. Without a stopping rule, success quietly increases exposure to downside. Housel argues that never enough is one of the most dangerous financial mindsets. Not because ambition is bad, but because unchecked ambition removes limits. There's always someone with more money, status, and visibility. And if your definition of success is relative, the finish line will never arrive. At that point, risk-taking no longer serves a purpose and becomes compulsive. Housel uses extreme cases to make the point clear. People who reach elite levels of wealth and influence still manage to destroy their lives trying to climb one rung higher. Not because they needed more resources, but because comparison made their existing position feel insignificant. He contrasts this with quieter success stories. People who've never reached the top of any hierarchy but stopped early, preserved what they had, and avoided catastrophic loss. The difference wasn't intelligence, it was knowing when to stop. Humans evaluate success relatively. We don't ask, do I have enough to live the life I want? We ask, how am I doing compared to others? That framing creates permanent dissatisfaction. Housel summarizes this dynamic simply by the hardest financial skill is getting the goal point to stop moving. Housel's position shouldn't be interpreted as a critique of ambition itself. Ambition builds things while comparison destroys them. The problem is risking what you already need for something you don't. The danger appears when the pursuit of more becomes detached from purpose. This explains why people with extraordinary resources still experience anxiety because they're managing status. Without a definition of enough, every gain increases pressure rather than relief. Security becomes fragile and satisfaction then becomes temporary. People naturally judge outcomes by what they can observe. A visible lifestyle can be taken as proof of financial strength, but those signals only show that money was spent, not that it exists. Because capital by definition is unspent resources, and unspent resources are invisible. Housel draws a sharp distinction between being rich and being wealthy. Rich is current income and visible consumption. Wealth is stored optionality, money that can absorb shock, buy time, and create freedom. The paradox is that the most admired financial behaviors often destroy the thing they're meant to signal. Spending money to look wealthy reduces actual wealth. Housel points out that admiration is misplaced. When people see a luxury car, they don't admire the owner's discipline, they admire the car and imagine themselves in it. The owner gains a little social credit while permanently losing financial flexibility. He contrasts this with people who appear ordinary but quietly accumulate reserves. They attract no attention, but they possess resilience. Humans overvalue symbols and undervalue buffers. We've evolved to notice status markers because they once indicated survival advantages. But in modern finance, those markers are often liabilities. We chase visibility because it provides immediate validation, and then tend to ignore invisibility because it provides delayed benefit. An easy misread of this lesson could be taken as an argument for austerity or moral restraint. The argument isn't don't spend, it's understand what spending costs beyond the price tag. Every dollar spent on appearance is a dollar no longer available for flexibility. Wealth is not what you buy, it's what you choose not to buy. This explains why financial stress often persists at high income levels. As a result, lifestyle expands faster than safety. And security depends less on earnings and more on what remains untouched. Money's highest value is its control over time. Most people associate money with lifestyle upgrades, bigger homes, better cars, more options to consume. But those gains often come with the invisible costs of longer hours, higher stress, and reduced autonomy. Housel defines true wealth as the ability to control how you spend your day. Not retiring early, but having the power to say no, to walk away from situations you don't want, to choose work that aligns with your values and structure your life without constant financial pressure. Money becomes most valuable when it removes coercion. Also contrasts high earners with low autonomy against modest earners with control. Someone earning significantly less but with flexible time may be wealthier in practice than someone earning far more but trapped by obligations. Housel also reframes saving. He says that it's not delayed consumption, but every dollar that's not spent that increases future choice. Humans underestimate the emotional cost of lost autonomy. Stress tends to correlate more strongly with lack of control than with lack of money. People tolerate long hours, pressure, and instability longer than they should because they believe money will compensate. But money that reduces freedom defeats its own purpose. But interpreting this as a call for minimalism or early retirement would be a mistake. What Housel's saying is freedom is the absence of forced work. You can be deeply engaged in meaningful effort while still being free, as long as participation is voluntary. This explains why many people with high incomes feel trapped, because their financial structure optimized for earnings, not autonomy. The best financial decisions are not the most mathematically optimal ones. They're the ones you can stick with. Traditional finance treats people like machines. If option A produces higher expected returns than option B, then A is better. But real people don't live inside spreadsheets. They feel fear, stress, and regret. And those emotions don't disappear just because a decision is statistically sound. When a plan creates ongoing psychological discomfort, people abandon it, often at the worst possible moment. Housel draws a clear distinction between rational and reasonable. Rational decisions maximize expected value on paper, and reasonable decisions maximize the chance that a person stays consistent over time. Markets don't reward the smartest plan. They reward the plan that survives human behavior. A strategy that looks inferior mathematically can outperform in practice if it prevents panic, second guessing, or abandonment. Housel uses debt as a clean illustration. From a purely rational perspective, paying off low interest debt early may be suboptimal, but for somebody who experiences constant anxiety while in debt, eliminating it can be the better decision, because it restores emotional stability, which supports long-term consistency. He applies the same logic to investing. A slightly more conservative portfolio that someone can hold through downturns will outperform a theoretically superior portfolio that gets sold off during stress. Humans don't fail because they don't know what's optimal. They fail because they can't tolerate the emotional cost of optimality. This is where reasonable choices reduce friction between plan and psychology. But reasonable doesn't mean careless. It means acknowledging emotional limits and designing around them. A plan that only works for an emotionless version of yourself is not a real plan. This lesson explains why many people repeatedly break good strategies. It's because the strategies weren't wrong, they were incapable with human behavior. Financial success is less about finding the best system and more about finding a system that aligns with how people actually respond to uncertainty. The future won't resemble the past, and plans that assume otherwise eventually fail. People build financial plans around what feels normal, but history is not shaped by normal periods. It's shaped by rare events with disproportionate impact. So when plans rely on precision, then they collapse under surprise. Housel argues that the most important part of any plan is planning for it to go wrong, because uncertainty isn't a flaw in the system, it is the system. Events that change financial trajectories are almost always the ones no one predicted. Housel points to major historical disruptions, financial crises, wars, pandemics. None were predicted in advance with useful accuracy, yet they dominated long-term outcomes. He also highlights market performance. A small number of extreme days account for a large portion of total returns. Missing them, often due to panic or overconfidence, dramatically alters results. Humans overestimate predictability. We feel safer when we believe the future is knowable. So we overfit to history and mistake familiarity for reliability. But the most consequential events lie outside our expectations, which can lead to a problem when confidence in prediction reduces resilience. This lesson explains why highly optimized systems fail catastrophically. They'll work perfectly until they don't. But systems with buffers absorb shock. Those without buffers break under pressure. And financial success depends less on precision and more on durability. Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money offers an explanation for why people behave the way they do when the future is uncertain. Across every lesson, a single pattern repeats. Money decisions are not driven by intelligence, they are driven by experience, emotions, and identity. People aren't irrational because they lack information. They're rational within the reality that they've lived. That's why financial outcomes diverge so widely even among people who know the same facts. Once that foundation is set, the rest of the book follows logically. Taken together, these ideas form a simple psychology. Money is a tool for managing uncertainty. Used well, it reduces fragility. Used poorly, it amplifies fear, envy, and overconfidence. Housel quietly concludes that this is not about getting rich. It's about building a financial life that doesn't require you to be perfect, brilliant, or lucky all the time. Once you understand the psychology behind money, the question stops being how can I get more and becomes what am I trying to protect? Because the ultimate measure of financial success is not how much you accumulate, but how well your decisions hold up when the future refuses to cooperate. That is the psychology of money.